What do I do now? Do I fight and live? Or do those monsters get me?
In my last video, I discussed the recent announcements by Konami that several new Silent Hill projects were in the works, and how it reminded me a lot of the events that took place now over 10 years ago regarding the Silent Hill HD collection in the infamous Month of Madness. However, in looking at the comments on the last video and seeing a lot of the discussions that take place on the subreddit, it's clear to me that a lot of people may not have been in the community long enough to know what happened back then, and how it seemed like Konami was working overtime to lose our trust and continually release mediocre Silent Hill games. Really, to look at the beginning of all of this, we have to go back to when Team Silent disbanded officially in 2005. After the release of Silent Hill 3 and during the development of Silent Hill 4, Team Silent was effectively split, with a lot of the major players leaving and doing freelance work, and the people that remained being referred to as the B Team. And this is the generally accepted reason as to why Silent Hill 4's design principles differ so wildly from the earlier games. And this is also why Silent Hill 4 is frequently referred to as the most divisive of the Team Silent releases. But while it may have a reputation of being divisive, it is definitely still a success, and I believe it deserves just as much praise as Silent Hill 1, 2, and 3 for keeping a lot of the polish and sound design that we had come to appreciate from the previous games. After Team Silent had officially disbanded, a lot of people in the community were curious as to whether or not Silent Hill would even continue. But to Konami, the choice was clear that Silent Hill needed to continue, whether for monetary reasons or because it was such a big name, we don't really know. The first of the post-Team Silent games would be Silent Hill Origins, originally released on the PSP. Also, I do want to be clear, this is not an in-depth review of each one of these Western Silent Hill games. I just want to give some insight into how, as a fan, it was pretty obvious that something was off with these games. The music itself was still being composed by Akira Yamaoka, with some vocal performances by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who started her work on Silent Hill 3, so honestly, the soundtracks were still up to par, and I enjoy them immensely to this day. When it came to the rest of the game, however, it was pretty clear that something wasn't quite right. And yeah, I understand that the PSP was a pretty limited piece of hardware, but it did eventually get a PS2 release, and even then, something just felt a little bit off. The graphics weren't really as good as some of the older games, which kind of baffled me since it was so new. The frame rate would dip in a few areas, and it just became pretty clear to me that this was noticeably lower quality than some of the games I had played in the past. And that's without even mentioning the writing, which I'm not going to go too in depth on right now because that could probably fill the subject of about 10 videos. But overall, Silent Hill Origins was a pretty mediocre release, and I was more excited for a mainline console game to come out, as the PS3 and Xbox 360 were still fairly new consoles at the time. So I was extremely surprised and excited to see that at E3 2007, the official announcement trailer for Silent Hill 5 was shown. It was an extremely basic trailer with some fog in the background, the halo of the sun, and the working title Silent Hill 5 appearing on screen, but that's all it took for me to get excited. Homecoming definitely took a more mass market approach, especially in terms of combat and gameplay. They added melee combos and a dodge roll, and just the main character Alex Shepard's design. Other people have said he looks like Nick Lachey, but I think he looks a lot more like Jensen Ackles or Dean from Supernatural. Immediately upon popping it into my 360 and playing it for the first time, I got the same feeling as Origins that something was off. We had the shift to a more traditional third-person action style camera, and a lot of the visual effects, such as the noise filter, were either cranked up to absurd levels or seemed like they were actually being used to cover up some pretty bad texture work. I'm not exaggerating at all when I say that some of the textures in Silent Hill Homecoming look worse than textures I've seen on the PS2 or Dreamcast even. Especially when it comes to the character models, the hands, the hair, the faces, everything just feels very stiff and like there's not a lot of points of articulation going on. The writing was also pretty subpar, and just like Origins, that would take too much time for me to really discuss right now. But the absolute biggest saving grace of Silent Hill Homecoming is the soundtrack. Akira Yamaoka and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn really outdid themselves on the writing and composition for this soundtrack, and I believe it's one of the strongest that have ever been released, with songs like Witchcraft, Cold Blood, and One More Soul to the Call being some of my personal favorites. And while the writing was not on par with Team Silent's games, not by a long shot, I do just want to say that for the way that the game turned out, I think they did a pretty good job. Based on this interview with Tom Hewlett, the senior associate producer for the game, the original ending would have been a lot worse and probably would have tanked or ruined any sort of legitimacy that Silent Hill may have had by jumping the shark.
Originally, the producer of that game intended it to be the first in a trilogy.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so we
Wow.
could have had 3 games with Alex Shepard. And, Heather would come back to Silent Hill and join up with him and such. And the big end scene that they were planning was sort of this, big showdown between Josh, who represented water, and Alessa, who represented fire. And they'd sort of have a Super Saiyan battle over Toluca Lake.
What?
Yes, unfortunately, you heard that correctly. A Super Saiyan battle over Toluca Lake. During this promotional interview with Tom regarding Silent Hill Downpour, he mentioned that his biggest contribution to Homecoming was changing the ending. And while he's often scapegoated as one of the largest figureheads in why Silent Hill was quote-unquote ruined, I have to give him a lot of credit here for making sure that ending he described never saw the light of day. With Homecoming in the rear view, again, doubts and uncertainty began to appear about whether or not Silent Hill as a franchise would still continue on. But eventually, promo material began appearing for a new Silent Hill titled Shattered Memories. Originally conceived as a Silent Hill 1 remake, this was developed by Climax Studios, the same studio responsible for Silent Hill Origins. And Climax already had an idea for a new story in mind, so instead of just going for a remake, they decided to go for what they describe as a reimagining. A lot of the same recurring characters from Silent Hill 1 appear, like Harry, Sybil, Dahlia, etc., but the mechanics of Silent Hill as well as the backstories of these characters are completely different. Again, I'm not going to go too in-depth into the writing or the story because that's going to be a subject for another video at another time. One thing that I can definitely give some credit to Shattered Memories for, however, is that it has a generally good reputation in the community. One of the more common opinions you'll see is that Shattered Memories is definitely the West's best attempt at a Silent Hill game. It was a Nintendo Wii exclusive in the beginning, and honestly, the texture work, the character models, the environments, and just graphics in general are pretty impressive. Something I definitely did appreciate is that they made sure there were no load times when exploring the larger sections of town. It made pretty good use of the Wii's motion controls as well. Moving around the flashlight was pretty easy, a lot of the controls were pretty intuitive. My only legitimate complaint about Shattered Memories is that it's a bit too short and it's also a little bit too easy. Most of the puzzles are pretty trivial, and the game itself is very linear. Once again, the soundtrack for this is excellent, as Akira Yamaoka and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn would return once more, and this is one that I can definitely recommend. A few short months after the release of Shattered Memories, we got another trailer at E3 2010 for the game with the working title Silent Hill 8. This game would eventually become Silent Hill Downpour, but wouldn't be released until March of 2012. The look and general feel of this trailer was automatically a bit concerning. Especially toward the end, there seemed to be a large emphasis on ghostly hauntings. A lot of the graphics, especially the character models and textures, looked pretty rough in this trailer, but considering that the full game didn't actually release until almost 2 years later, I guess we can't judge it too harshly, as it was most likely very early on in development. So now that we've talked about Silent Hill Origins, Homecoming, Shattered Memories, and all the games that were worked on post-Team Silent, it's now time to talk about what I would consider easily the biggest failure in the history of Konami's handling of Silent Hill. And this is none other than the Silent Hill HD Collection. Originally announced as part of Konami's pre-E3 show for 2011, the HD Collection on paper was a brilliant idea. Silent Hill 2 was almost 10 years old, and Silent Hill 3 was about 8 years old at the time of this announcement, and honestly, it seemed like a no-brainer. Port these games to the PS3, as exclusivity was the original plan, and give people a viable alternative to picking up old PS2 or PC copies off of eBay. Personally, when I first saw this announcement, I was excited, but I also had some questions too. For one, why couldn't they just port Silent Hill 1 over? It seems like that would be a pretty easy one to just include on the disc. And it seemed like they were just forgetting about Silent Hill 4's existence entirely. I feel like this would have been more successful right from the outset had they included all 4 of the original Team Silent games. And remember, this was originally planned to be a PS3 exclusive, so they had plenty of space on the Blu-ray disc to include all 4 titles. But the decision had been made to only include Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3. Naturally, people started asking questions. Were original Team Silent members even involved with this? Would there be drastic changes? Why are they not releasing it on Xbox 360? Well, at Gamescom 2011, Konami had prepared a video of Tom Hewlett answering some of the community's questions. For one, he did announce that after a lot of complaining, and trust me, for anyone who doesn't know, it was a lot of complaining, that there would officially be an Xbox 360 release.
First off is Silent Hill HD Collection. Now, we previously announced this game is coming to PlayStation 3, and a number of you showed some interest in a potential Xbox 360 release. Well, I'm proud to announce today that the game will be released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and we're aiming to release both simultaneously. So Silent Hill fans, new and old, will be able to experience these classics regardless of their console of choice.
However, before this press conference, it had been announced that there would be voice acting replacements for both games. So at the end of this promotional video, they had prepared a short demo reel to ensure us that the new actors will be able to deliver on all the same impact and feel as the original actors and the original casting. Let's just say everyone was less than impressed. It seemed that they had exclusively hired actors whose past work included anime and not a whole lot else outside of some JRPGs like Persona games. And Mary Elizabeth McGlynn was chosen to do the voice direction, who also had a lot of video game and anime experience, primarily on Japanese media. And so what we ended up with sounded exactly like a dubbed anime. Lots of unnecessary grunting, groaning. Now, let me be clear, Team Silent was very innovative, and they actually had the actors going all the way back to Silent Hill 2, performing these scenes on a stage while also recording the motion capture, and then they would have them go into a booth and record the lines. Guy Seehee, James Sunderland's voice actor, has stated that once they went in the booth, it was very easy to recall the optimal delivery that the directors liked and that the actors liked. But with these new lines, you could tell that there wasn't really any cohesion in this cast. It just seemed like people recording lines separately and splicing them together later, which it turns out is exactly how it was done. And not to say that the original 4 games are master classes in voice acting, but I definitely feel like they turned out a lot better than whatever this was supposed to be. Shortly after this announcement, people were furious. Complaints all over different forums, complaints on the Silent Hill wiki, complaints on the Silent Hill subreddit, and last but not least, a lot of negative reaction videos started appearing on YouTube. And that short Gamescom promotional video had been downvoted into oblivion, the likes of which I had never seen before. Tom's immediate response was to release an angry blog post saying that he underestimates people's ability to look at pre-alpha stuff and that the voices hadn't been mixed into the game, hence why they sounded so rough. But the way I always felt about this response was, A, it was a bit childish. It definitely seemed like he took the negativity personally. And on top of that, if the voices were so rough that they're considered pre-alpha and unmixed, why would they present them in this way if they knew they were of poor quality? Naturally, this response did not go over very well with the fan base, and people began being even more pissed off than they already were. On top of that, some screenshots had begun leaking online, and good God, were they ugly. Their idea of remastering Silent Hill 2's roadways was just to put in new road textures and make them perfectly clean. They did the same thing to the entrance in Lakeside Amusement Park for Silent Hill 3. All the dirt, blood, rust, whatever it happens to be on the floor, all that great detail and all that artwork is just gone. Ito was a large part of the response on Twitter, as a lot of people immediately sent it to him asking if he knew that this project was in the works and what these screenshots looked like compared to the original game. And while Ito made a lot of great points, and again, this could be a topic for a whole other video, he mainly mentioned that the primary graphical attributes of the game had been completely demolished in lieu of these clean new textures, and that this is not the way the game was intended to be presented and not the way that it should look at all. So the game hasn't even been released, and we already have outrage about voice acting replacements, outrage about the lack of a 360 port, they did eventually remedy that, and now outrage about these pre-release screenshots looking frankly terrible. It seemed that all signs pointed to a failure with this project. And I've always been baffled by Konami's decision to just ignore all the negativity and release the games anyway. But spoiler alert, virtually nothing was changed on final release. Those voices that hadn't been mixed into the game that were pre-alpha, yeah, they basically sounded identical on the final product, even down to the mixing and the EQ. One thing I will say is that Silent Hill 2 did eventually get the option for original voices, but it was not without a lot of legal issues and a lot of controversy. Essentially, Konami had not paid the actors for multi-platform releases of either Silent Hill 2 or Silent Hill 3, with Guy Seehee and others claiming that they weren't even aware of the existence of a PC port, an Xbox port, or any of the greatest hits or platinum hits releases of Silent Hill 2 after the initial Black Label copy had been released. Konami initially reached out to all the original actors with a waiver release, essentially asking them to sign away their rights without compensation, and they thought that this would clear them of all the money that they did owe the actors for multi-platform releases. A few of the actors did sign these waivers, but most importantly, Guy Seehee, again the voice actor for James, did not sign this. Instead, he began reaching out to Konami directly to get some more information, as it became clear to him that he was not compensated properly for the multi-platform releases of Silent Hill 2. Konami decided that it was in their best interest to completely ignore Guy's requests, and they decided to make the decision to present the games with new voices only. After this news got out, it understandably created some outrage because we now knew the reason why the original voices weren't being included. However, Konami's decision was to scapegoat Guy Seehee and blame him for everything, saying that if he would have just signed the papers, they would have just used what they had and included the original voices as well. They even had Troy Baker, the guy who was selected to play New James, and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn echoing this sentiment at different conventions and on their podcast appearances at the time, saying, quote, "You can blame the guy that played James, because had he not put up a fight, they would have just used the originals." And this was around the time that Guy Seehee decided to make a pretty selfless move. He saw that people were extremely upset about the situation, and he didn't want the reputation of Silent Hill to be ruined. He made the decision to band all the original Silent Hill 2 actors together so they could sign away their rights without compensation collectively. And this pretty quickly shattered the narrative of people working for Konami at the time that this was strictly a business move or that he was just in it for the money. And honestly, still to this day, I do respect him for this move. Unfortunately for Silent Hill 3, their reasoning was that they could not reach Heather Morris, the original actress for Heather Mason in the game, and this was their reasoning for why they were not going to include the original voices for Silent Hill 3. Let's just say that the voice acting was the least of their concerns when the game finally did release. YouTube was immediately flooded with negative reactions to the collection. As mentioned previously, comparison screenshots showed obvious downgrades and even downright ruination of the imagery. It was tough to believe that it was even released in such a state. I remember putting in the PlayStation 3 copy around launch, hoping that some of these issues had been addressed, and being met with a massive day 1 patch. This would have been concerning enough, but after I installed the patch and launched the game, I saw that virtually nothing was changed. What I saw in pre-release screenshots was exactly what was on screen. The frame rate was awful, the fog was missing, and just in general, I felt like not only were both of these games ruined, but there was no effort put into this collection to actually improve anything. The audio deafens your ears at some points, it's too quiet in others, sound effects are missing, sound effects are played incorrectly at the wrong speeds. I can't even begin to get into the technical details of exactly what's wrong with these two games without filling my own hour-plus long video, so for that, I recommend heading over to either Twin Perfect or AnEternalEnigma's channel to get some more detailed insight on exactly what was wrong by the time the game was finally in our hands. Sales figures for the HD collection were pretty dismal, even across all regions and both PS3 and 360 versions, something that virtually everyone in the community knew was going to be the outcome just by looking at the pre-release information that we were given. So with all the lead up and disappointment involved in the HD collection, something that should have been an easy home run for Konami, how can they even begin to reclaim their reputation amongst the community and show that they actually care and want to create another great Silent Hill game? Well, assumedly, they were going to come back to massive fanfare with the next mainline Silent Hill game, Silent Hill oh, Jesus Christ. Again, as discussed previously, Silent Hill Downpour is about as blatant of a Silent Hill 2 ripoff as you could possibly get. Not only that, the textures were extremely muddy, somehow even worse than Homecoming, Shattered Memories, and Origins. Konami handed this entire game off to Vatra Games, who had made virtually nothing before this. They obviously didn't have the budget, the resources, and to keep it brutally honest, the talent. So starting with the initial 4 Team Silent games that were all praised in their own way for their attention to detail, their polish, their sound design, lighting, everything in between, and seeing the slow degradation of not only Konami's reputation, but seemingly their care for Silent Hill from 2005 to 2012, it's no surprise that they decided to completely shut down new game releases because the sales figures just weren't there. It probably wasn't even viable for them to continue developing these games at that point. The last game in the disastrous Month of Madness didn't even get released in March. It was actually delayed until October of 2012. And this was a game developed exclusively for Sony's newest handheld, the PlayStation Vita, which was a Silent Hill themed dungeon crawler. Yeah, I really don't even think I need to say much more than that. The sales for this were also very dismal, and this was pretty much the nail in the coffin. I specifically remember going to pick this game up at a GameStop local to me, and I saw that it was basically discounted for nothing, so I figured, hey, why not? I'll go ahead and pick it up. As soon as the clerk saw the game, he put his hand over it, slid it to the side of the counter, looked me in the face, and said, "No, you don't want this." The sheer absurdity of the fact that a GameStop employee would prevent me from giving them money in exchange for this game still makes me laugh every time I think about it. But it just goes to show how awful the reputation was for Silent Hill at the time and how nobody, and I repeat, nobody wanted this game. This was clearly just a cash grab from Konami to put some sort of Silent Hill themed something on the PS Vita and get it out there. But it can easily be said that the beginning of the HD collection debacle, starting all the way back with the pre-release information and ending with the release of Book of Memories in late 2012, that at this point in time, unless drastic changes were made or a lot more budget was allocated to Silent Hill, there really was no recovering. And that's the story of how Silent Hill pretty much became a dead series for over a decade. Outside of the exorbitant amount of hype around PT/Silent Hills and Konami's subsequent cancellation of it, there really wasn't anything to get excited about outside of the occasional pretty poor merch release and skate decks, I guess. Yay. And then of course the Silent Hill Pachi slot was released, which has much higher quality cutscenes than the HD collection could have ever reproduced. And while it does need to be stated that this Pachi slot was developed and released by a division that's completely separate from Konami's games and entertainment divisions, it still didn't quite sit right with people, and it definitely seemed like Konami was just holding on to the Silent Hill IP to milk it for all it was worth in terms of merchandising and licensing. Thank you guys for watching. I still can't quite believe the amount of support on the first video. It's just crazy to me. I really appreciate all the kind words in the comments and even the not so kind words. You know, I'm always open to constructive criticism, trying to improve my editing style and anything else I can about the presentation of my videos. If you want to come hang out and, you know, chat about horror or Silent Hill with me, I play the shitty ones quite a bit, even over on my Twitch channel. It's Stampede_G, just like the YouTube channel. I'm also going to link my Discord down below. I always post in there whenever I go live and what game I'm going to be playing. And yeah, many more videos on the way, so stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.